coordinates. And the Udemy tutorials are very helpful at getting into that, but you're going to have to really do some programming. What I did was use the target-based. And for example, a consumer organization might want to have their particular cereal box be the target. Okay, I needed to get something that was general. Targets have to have enough turning points. I found a card deck that everybody could get. And what I did was, I'm having trouble turning. I don't know why I can't turn my slides now. Okay. What you do is, when you follow the tutorials, you get animated objects. You can get them. I got this one from Unity. It was free. I worked with 3 materials. And you ultimately bring them into the, my things seem to be moving. Oops. I don't know. I'm having a little trouble with my slide set here. I will send it out. But what you do is get these animated items. See if I can go back. And you ultimately bring them into the Unity platform and you manipulate them. You then go through other steps to get it over to the cell phone. But there are many objects that you can bring in, and I'm going to wrap this up with showing you what I developed. Okay, so you can go in, get these objects. Google is really jumping into this business, and they're using a function as well where people can upload their own materials. So, let's see if I can go back through this. Google has Google Blocks now. I went in, and many of these are completely open source, or they've been made available by Google. And you can bring those to hover over items, which is one thing you can do in augmented reality. So here was a cake. I was into food and stuff. Okay, so here's just showing a little bit about how I set things up. You know, I started using the platform, brought in my greeting cards, and started getting the free objects to hover over them. And again, if you take the course, you're going to be doing some of this work. You also need to be able to move things around. And so you have an interface. You can use an image as well. And this is just showing you that at one point you can take an image. These are family members of mine who then were playing cards, and I was using a card theme. So they did some work with this particular type of interface. Okay. Now let me see. I'm having trouble turning my slides. Yeah. I don't know if anybody else is clicking them. Just a couple, oops. I don't know whether I'm getting lag here. Okay, just a couple of other things to show you the interface. You can go in, you can program within it, you can change buttons. This is what the interface looks like. This is what Mark will be showing you, and this is what the people taking the AR course will be looking at. And it takes a little investment of time. This is not going to be as straightforward as downloading islands. But you will see, this is me. I had a friend. This is just something I happened upon from Microsoft Office. If you have the latest version, it's Microsoft 3D, and you can play with it. Now, but I want to say, what are we doing this for? This was my family this summer. They all came in, played with my grandchildren. I got a chance to work with them at the computer, which was very interesting to see how the young work with this. And I do tell you, the young are there. So we need to find out what we can do to be there. And so we're going to end at that, but I have one more thing to show you. And we'll take a break now. You're going to move over to Dr. Alon's island for joining up at 11. And you could go there right away. Nicola, before I give them before I give them my final little video, do you want to say anything about where they should land and what they should be prepared for?
Yes, thank you. I'll be happy to do that, Eileen. So everyone, what we'll be doing over on the Empire Learning Design region will be a little bit different from what we've done today. Dr. O'Connor has given a marvelous introduction to what is possible and touched upon, elements and ideas related to world building. I'll be talking a little bit more in depth about what you need to think about and some of the design considerations and the practical considerations, as well as the more creative aspects of what goes into designing and building an effective virtual environment, virtual world, whether or not it is in something like Kitely or principles that could be applied in practice to any type of 2D, 3D, or other virtual world. The way we'll do this is through a walking and talking tour. So instead of showing you slides, we'll all be walking around the 4 regions that are part of Empire's Learning Design. And as we walk around and you look at the elements and you explore, I'll be telling you about the various aspects of world building that we can cover within 1 short hour or less, and then also be open to questions. And then if you who are expert and experienced in world building as well could perhaps pipe in with your comments on various experiences or suggestions as we have these considerations. So the place we'll start will be at the Showcase Theater in Empire Learning Design. We have 4 regions, and I was trying to think which would be the best one as a starting point. And we have a beautiful Japanese garden that is right next to the modified Kabuki Theater that serves as our presentation showcase environment. And I think meeting just outside of that would be a great place to start. So what I'm going to do is, for everyone who's already sitting here, I'm going to pop into your name tag the teleport landmark for the Showcase Theater Garden. It'll land you right there in front of the Showcase Theater. And so that way you can click on that to go there. Otherwise, you go into Empire Learning Design, you're looking for the Showcase Theater. If you get lost over there, just open up the flag icon on the lower part of your viewer. If you're using Firestorm, brings up the map. Look at the map. Wherever you see a ton of green dots is where people will be. If you see just one green dot, then that means somebody's either exploring or lost. So I will give you the teleporter landmark, and if you happen to get lost, have questions, please reach out to one of us who knows the way around. And I am happy to send you a direct IM to bring you on board as well. So thank you, Eileen, for giving me those few moments, and I'll start distributing the landmark right now.
I will be sending out the PowerPoints with some links, and if you come in and if you take a break and or visit, your avatar will stay there. And also when you take a lunch break, if your avatar goes offline, you just come in again. And yeah, so we'll see you all there. Mosey over, and we'll start up again at 11. Thank you so much, everybody. I'm also going to put in the link for the evaluation. If you're not staying the whole time, we'd appreciate you giving us some of your feedback. It's anonymous. If not,
Did anyone not receive the landmark? If you didn't, please let me know, and I'll make sure I give it to you before I head out there. It looks like everyone's all set. I will see everyone soon over on the other side.
Is my mic on? Oops, let's turn it off.
Hi, Eileen. This is Nicola. Yes, I figured we'd wait a few more minutes. We have about 4 or
Yes,
5
yeah,
minutes
sorry.
before we.
Mm-hmm. Do you want me to do anything in particular? Should I assemble any people who are here yet? Or I'll just keep my mic off and hopefully catch some recordings, and I'll just take the lead from you as to any support you might need.
Thank you so much, Eileen. I think that ideally just sort of bringing in people who seem to be lost, if that's the case, or, you know, some people may just be exploring, which is fine because I believe that the voice carries quite a ways across the sim. So I'll just get started in a few moments and we'll round people up. Yes, indeed. But a few minutes. I see that a couple of people have started arriving. Several people were just here early. But then we have others arriving. I'll give them a few minutes and then get started.
I just had a very weird glitch with my camera. I sat down and all of a sudden my point of view was floating in the sky 200 feet in the air.
Oh, that might just be because as we start bringing people in onto Sims in this environment, sometimes things just glitch a little bit. For example, I went up to my platform to take care of a little detail of something I wanted to have ready for us. And when I arrived, I was glitching for a little bit. So I think I wouldn't worry unless it's something that continually repeats itself. If it starts and then fixes itself, you should be okay. But expect some glitching when we start having a number of people arriving together at the same time on various regions.
And Dr. Lana, I like how you have the vegetation tied in with the environment. This is, did you do that yourself? Did you, do a little research and get the right type of materials? Oh my goodness, I didn't know about that, Sean.
Well, I don't know. It wasn't so much that I did research on the materials. I really, as you know, I'm an artist, so I have a general idea about these kinds of things. So what I did was, I bought a lot, and I'll talk a little bit about this as we move forward. But a lot of the different trees and plants were bought from various vendors who create these kinds of things. They're not the innate ones to Second Life or Kitely. And I was able to simply do a lot of research on what kinds of things are available in the Kitely market, purchase them, integrate them. I did do the work myself with regards to integrating all of the different elements, using the landscaping tools, the terraforming tools, and that sort of thing. The beautifully integrated Japanese gardens that connect to the Kabuki Theater were actually created by the same artist.
Testing.
Yes, her name is Amiru Hosoi, I believe is how she pronounces that. And she is an incredible artist that was always one of my favorites in Second Life. I was delighted to see her move into Kitely and make a lot of her authentic medieval Japanese materials available. And so a few of the touches on this particular region that are things like the little Japanese garden arrangements and the bridges actually come from the same creator as the Kabuki Theater, so that they all integrate. However, a number of the other elements are from a variety of different creators that I knew happened to make a number of the kinds of elements I was looking for. Fortunately, some of my favorite tree designers and landscaping creators from Second Life are here. Such as Heart of Pentacles. So I was able to go to the marketplace and buy a number of trees from them and so on.
Oh, hi. Can you hear me?
Yes. Welcome,
Yeah.
Selby. We haven't
Hi.
gotten started yet. We were just waiting for everyone to arrive. We're about to get started.
Yeah, I just had a quick question while we're waiting. Can you tell me what formats can be imported into Kitely, like SketchUp or 3ds Max?
Honestly, I am not sure which particular formats, from those areas can be imported. I'm assuming that most of them will be supported. I personally use different set of formats, so I'm not sure which ones can be brought in. Saley is saying that SketchUp and Blender, of course, Blender, yes, absolutely. I've had some things come in from SketchUp. I don't know if it was the quality of the person who created them or the ones that I've seen, but they haven't been as high end as some of the ones that I've seen from, let's say, that were designed in Blender or Maya and those sorts of things.
Nicola, there are a few in the theater. Should I get them to come out here now? Or where do you want to start your tour? I
was
can round
thinking
people
that
up.
starting right here would be good because I think this is a good spot for introductory remarks. and before we move into sort of walking around and deciding what to do with them. So just a moment, let me pause for a second, and I'll walk over there and let people know that they may.
Also, when Dr. Lund comes back, remember to toggle on and off your mic. Particularly, I have, a mic next to my mouth, so it's not a problem. But if your mic goes into the red zone when you're talking, that means it's kind of irritating. And also, be sure to toggle it off so we just don't get background noise. And we'll follow along and learn. I've always enjoyed Nicola's work.
Thank you, Eileen. Richard
Yeah.
and Steve and Steph, can you hear me? We're meeting over here in the gardens. If you wouldn't mind standing up and turning to look behind you, and you'll see that we're right over here in the gardens. I'm standing looking at you through the doors right now. And we'll have a little opening remarks over in the garden area.
Also, don't worry if you can't move around too well. It takes time. I've been doing this for years, and it's not my emphasis on learning how to walk, so I'm not very good myself. If you bump into one another, that's not a problem. So don't worry. Although you can actually push one another, that is a feature you can turn on and off, particularly if you're working with children. So don't worry about your navigation abilities. We're going to be here to kind of help if any of you get lost along the way.
Yes, and there is a feature that I have enacted in for myself in the preferences. I'm not quite sure. It's probably under Move, but it was a while ago when I enabled this, and I haven't redone it. But you might want to look for it if you're interested. You can set it so that if you click on an area, it will walk you through that area with one click. For example, if I click here. And if you have the double clicks enabled, it just takes you right to that spot. So I'm going to click back on the steps and it'll take me right back here. So I don't have to worry about taking the walk to those places. Or if I am walking and get bumped off for some reason, I just double click on the spot I want to be and it'll take me right there. So if you do that, that will make it so much easier for you when you're moving around. You can just, even if it's a pretty far off spot, you can just target the area you want to be on, double click, and it will take you there right away. So that's just another simplification of movement. No, Ryan, I should not be looking like a shadow. I'm actually a full avatar dressed. So if you're just seeing shadows, that's most likely what's happening on your end. Interesting. Okay, let me just try something. Give me a moment, and I'm just going to try something with my outfit here. Okay, okay, so Jana said she sees me. So am I more visible than to others? Eileen sees me well. Okay, so Sally's suggesting that you could click on my avatar, which would mean that it may make it render for you further. But we'll go ahead and get started. Oh, thank you, Eileen. I do like having the touches of glasses for my avatar. I think they give them more personality. So here we go. In the interest of time, let's get started talking a little bit about world building considerations. I wanted you to start here on this region because we do have sort of an integrated garden. I want you to notice that there are pathways that lead clearly from one area of the region to another, and that you're going to find bridges leading directly from one part of the sim to the next. That way, if somebody is new to an area and doesn't really understand how to navigate a region, the pathways and the wayfinding are very clear. So what we find on the 4 regions of the Empire Learning Design Sim are interconnected regions, each part of the region serving a clear purpose and integrated pathways between each one. So we'll talk a little bit about how we get there. But first, let me say welcome. And that this session will primarily be a walking, talking session. And that later on, there'll be a session in which we talk more about the arts and media in this environment, in which we'll have a hands-on activity. So before we begin, for some of you who are in my classes or have been in my classes, you'll know that I am a big proponent of making sure that whatever we design meets the goals of the learners and the objectives that you have for the design itself. And that's regardless of whether you're building a virtual world or any other learning or arts-based environment. We want to think, what is the purpose of this world? How will it be used? Why will it be used? Who are the users? What will they need to do in this world? How do we engage them in this environment? And then how do I make sure that this environment serves both my learners and the purposes for which it was intended? Now, of course, it could serve many other purposes as well, but primarily it should serve a combination of the user needs and the needs of whatever activities will take place in the environment. So let me give you a bit of an origin story here. We had a fabulous campus in Second Life, and we had gotten together as a full team of faculty and other students, other users of our campus, and worked with an architect to design what we would love to have, inspired by the beautiful Congress Park and our Union campus in Saratoga Springs, New York. For those of you not familiar with Saratoga, it is a beautiful Victorian city. It's a tourist destination. People come from all over to have a wonderful experience in a vibrant, cultural, artistic, and historical city. And so we hoped to capture some of that flavor in our Saratoga Springs campus in Second Life. We were able to do that, but unfortunately, that campus was discontinued a couple of years ago, and we had very little forewarning. And therefore, Dr. Connor and I already had our spaces that we were using for experimenting with students, and they were working with us. And so what we did was decide that we would each start developing for the use of the program various regions that would then replace what we had in Second Life. I'm giving this origin story so you know that the first 2 environments I created were very geared towards my users and what we needed to do. I needed a round table discussion area for our round table discussions. So I created the lake house by bringing in a Linda Kelly sim that had a lake house on it. And then I completely revised that so that it became a roundtable discussion space that was suited for that. It's a very easy space. Students get the link, they enter, they sit down. We have a conversation. No further skills or knowledge required in terms of navigating the virtual world. And we'll take a look at that in a moment. The second most important thing we needed was that we do showcase presentations at the end of every course. We have several meetings that require using the showcase presentation room, and we have a required program meeting in which first-year students are required to demonstrate their first-year culminating project to their faculty and peers, and they will be peer-reviewed. So we needed a space for that, which is why I created this environment, the Showcase Theater. I didn't want anything further than these two elements on the first two regions that I designed. And therefore, I simply have a wonderful roundtable discussion room used solely for that purpose. It is then connected to the other regions near it. You walk across a bridge, and here you come, right here, to enter a beautiful Japanese garden and the Kabuki Theater. Now, the reason I used this theater is twofold, and please feel free to follow me as I speak. First of all, aesthetically, I only like to work with well-designed materials. When possible, I prefer to repurpose something or buy it if it already exists, or use something open source rather than build it myself. Why? Because the time involved in building something from scratch, especially large architectural items, is very intensive. And frankly, I don't have that time. I do have the skills to create and build, but I decide when possible to purchase or repurpose and modify. I make sure that whatever I purchase is something I can absolutely modify. And so what happened here is that this particular environment did not look like this when I bought it. It had a very different floor format, chairs. And what I did was I stripped out all of the elements that wouldn't be well suited to a meeting environment for presentations. And I replaced them with elements that would work. And as you can see, I have great seats. I went ahead and established the chairs so that we could have a proscenium stage with viewer formats. And then I created a screen that is media enabled, and we can do all of our presentations, connecting to a variety of different tools, both 3D and simply URL based, using this presentation tool, which is very simple. I just put up a prim, and then I found years ago, I bought this fabulous texture, which is a sci-fi panel texture, and it's perfect for something like that, to provide the background for a screen. So there you have it. This particular theater was created in the same way, and oh, I see right here that there's a terrain issue right here. See how that came on? That was because when I was making some changes, I had a little problem with some things. So let me just eliminate the terrain that doesn't belong there. There we go. Yes, a prim is one of the basic building tools of the virtual world. They're wonderful. They're like Legos, except you can turn them into anything you want, and you can do all kinds of things with them. And, using, in this case, you see a prim in its most basic shape, but just simply flattened, made larger and flattened. However, a lot of designers who first started in Second Life before moving to Mesh learned how to manipulate these at a very high level and create all kinds of wonderful things. And then, of course, later on, Mesh was introduced as a possibility in Second Life and in Kitely, which is built on the same engine. And therefore, many items are made of Mesh now, which gives you a much more hyper-realistic 3D both artifact and format to work with. My environment combines both because I wasn't able to find always in Mesh the things I wanted, but I could find high-quality prim-based items that did what I needed to do. And since they both render just as well in this environment, to me, as long as they are aesthetically fit what I'm looking for and are functional and have the functionality I'm looking for, then that is what I get. Because sometimes things look good and they don't work right, or vice versa. And my goal is to always have something that has a combination of the right aesthetic and the right functionality. I tend to discard things or not use them if they do not meet those criteria for me. Oops, I see that somebody's having, some of these sit functions, once you have too many people in here, stop working quite right. So before we go on and start walking around so that you can visit the West Campus, I wanted to talk a little bit about the considerations you need to have when you're building a world. Now, I did mention that sort of user needs must come first. Because if you build an environment that nobody needs and that doesn't put their needs in consideration, then what's the point? You'll have a beautiful space that nobody ever uses. So you really want to make sure that what you create is adaptive to your learner or your user needs. And of course, the second important element is that whatever you create must be well suited to the purpose of that environment. Yes, I agree, Sally. That was going to be my next point. The whole idea of design being important. Now, if we want to, I was going to give another introduction, but we can talk a little bit about design first. You want to make sure that you would hear, ideally, two basic principles of design. Making sure that your world is balanced, that you do have areas that have an emphasis, that draw the eye and that bring the user to the area that you would like to have them be in. You want to make sure that you carefully design how movement could or would take place. Ideally, you want to make sure that your patterns, in other words, the way you have repetitions of objects or symbols, that they all are consistent and work well. And then again, the idea of repetitions working with your patterns bring a whole new level of coherence and action to the work that you have. You want to work to have a feeling of unity in terms of your proportions. Whatever proportions you decide to use, whatever parts, just make sure they relate well together. And ideally, you also want to create a rhythm. If you think about what happened in that space outside in the garden area, you can see how if you went from one bridge to the next, there was sort of rhythm in that, in the rolling hills that integrate into the pathway that goes down a little bit lower to show your avatar that this is the way you would be walking and that leads you rhythmically right into the theater. Variety is another element. You want to use a number of different elements of design that hold the viewer's attention. And most important, whatever environment you create needs to have a sense of unity in design. And as you can see in this particular sim, it was the first thing that Eileen mentioned. She liked the way everything was integrated together, that all the elements fall into place. And that is a very key principle of design. And that works for anything. It doesn't matter if you're creating a painting, in visual art, or if you're creating a 3D world. Ideally, you want to bring each of these principles into play. So design considerations are very important. But there are other elements. So beyond visual design, then you want to think about a combination of things. And I don't have time to go into them in great detail. But if you're working in learning design, then you have to include the instructional design elements, the learning design component. If you're working in information design, then you want to also be including the pieces that you know about, how do you present this information? How do you chunk it if you're going to have a variety of information available in your world? And in that piece also, the whole element of wayfinding and path making comes into play. Like, make sure that you have clear paths. Make sure you have signage that leads people where they need to go, that helps them understand what they need to do. That does not have to be something that's huge and obtrusive and takes away from your design. As you've seen with my design on this sim, there's a subtle way and of integrating all of this together so that you can have the kind of subtle signs I have out there. And frankly, even though I could have created those myself, I'm a whiz at Photoshop, in which most of these kinds of things could be created. I didn't want to spend the time on that because somebody on Kitely makes custom signs for 50 Kitleys each, which is nothing. And I sent him an email and said, would you mind making me these following signs with these names on them? He said, no problem. Give me a couple of days. And 2 days later, he sent my inventory a set of signs that cost me all of $3. So I think that when you are making these considerations, you could, as Sally points out, get many of the open source, open free items. Or if you're going for something customized that you don't want to spend the time on, then there may be somebody on the marketplace or someone creating 3D resources that will help you repurpose them. In my case, I often repurpose things myself. If I know that someone does that and does it for cheap, I just have them do it. Why? Because I have very little time. And that is time that I can spend on the things that I cannot acquire myself or I cannot have someone else customize for me. So then I focus all my energy on those elements that I have to do and let other people take care of the things that I don't have to do. So we've talked about wayfinding, we've talked about instructional design, information design, learning design, and how you would integrate all of these things, ideally tied in with the principles of design. Before we start our walk around, which we're about to do in a few minutes, I want to tell you about the two authors, theorists who have most influenced my thinking about the design of virtual worlds. The first one is the author J.R.R. Tolkien. Now, of course, many of you may have seen The Lord of the Rings. If you have, raise your hand or say yes. Or The Hobbit or any other of his the films that have been made based on his worlds. Also, perhaps like me, you read the books. I took an entire undergraduate advanced seminar on J.R.R. Tolkien and his epic works compared to James Joyce and Ulysses. And that really informed my thinking about these worlds. So I really delved into them at a very deep level early on. But what interested me the most and what struck me the most about Tolkien in relationship to world building isn't those worlds at all. It's the fact that he wrote a fabulous little article called On Fairy Stories. It's a small one. Most people don't know about it. But it is one of the classic texts about world building that exists today and that informed most people's ideas that went into world building, whether you're creating that world building for a fictional novel, whether it's for fantasy, or whether it was for the early stages of game building. It's called On Fairy Stories. You'll find it in a little book called Tree and Leaf. It only costs a few dollars. Tree and Leaf has a couple of other wonderful little Tolkien stories that aren't that well known. What is important in that is that he talks about building a secondary world. And he talks about the premises of what happens or what needs to happen when you build a secondary world. And what stayed with me, the most important element, is that whether you're building outright pure fantasy and science fiction, or whether you're creating something very much based on the real world, you need to have absolute inner consistency in your world. And that is a premise that I apply to my world building. So, it doesn't matter whether your characters are elves or gnomes or dragons, or if they're actually IBM consultants attending an IBM conference, because IBM used to hold conferences and training in Second Life and had a fabulous set of Sims. I actually attended a few of their open conferences. when you enter that world, that environment, whether you're entering a application of IBM conference rooms and their physical campus in a virtual space, everything there should look like, you know, what you would expect to see in an IBM-based conference environment. If you're building the Elven realm in Second Life, or in Kitely, or in Worlds, or many of the worlds where they have these kind of fantasy communities, then what you would expect is that everything in that world is internally consistent. That if there is a magic that is presented in that world, then it's a real part of that world and is consistent in how it works, how it is applied, how it is discussed, and how it's used in that world. So the same thing applies for learning environments. Whatever you create, make sure there is an inner consistency to the reality of your world and the choices that you make in it. So that's the first most important consideration. And if you like a combination of, reading fantasy fiction, if you're interested in being a creative writer and author, if you're interested in an overall theory of how you go about thinking through and creating a secondary world, the article I mentioned on Fairy Stories by Tolkien is a wonderful way to approach that. But just be forewarned, this is from a back era, and so it precedes when we have all of these fabulous deep fantasy environments that we have now, when he spends a lot of time defining, what is a fairy world? What is a fairy story? And then he starts talking a lot about how you establish the elements of fantasy in relation to the real world. So that is also a part of that article, and you have to glean from that his comments on the building of a secondary world. So that's one important resource. Now, the other most important resource, and I have read many resources, many how-to books, and I've participated in a wide range of wonderful workshops, both in the real world and in the Second Life environment, or in Kitely or other virtual worlds, on world building in these environments. By far the best text that I have found, and that I feel if you're serious about this, you should read it, is Richard Bartle's Designing Virtual Worlds. Now, you might think it's a little bit dated because it's 2003. And in some regards, yeah, it might be a little bit dated. However, the history part of that talks about as far back as the Muds is not dated, because he's leading into what starts happening in, the 2000s. But the principles that he addresses, even though a lot of it is related to world building for game design, the principles that he discusses and the kinds of things you need to think through are all very deeply embedded in this work in a way that is relevant regardless of where you're building, what era we are in, and what types of tools you're using. So I'm just going to tell you briefly what he covers. He covers things like introduction to virtual worlds, what they are, whence they came, the past, how it affects the future, and the basics, etc. How to make virtual worlds, how to think about the architecture, the theory and practice of it, how to consider the players and what we'll call our users or our learners. What are these people and what do they do? What are the player types? How do they categorize? How do they create their identity? What happens with anonymity? And the list goes on of the considerations he has you think through. World design, what's your scope? What major decisions will you have to make? How will you handle your geography and population? What are the physics of your world? And so on. And then he talks about how you develop the character generation, what happens in the life of the virtual world. He talks about the fact that building the virtual world is not necessarily a game, and aesthetics of the visual world, as well as ethical considerations. I can't tell you how much that particular work really helped me start thinking process with me. You'll see that some of that is actually also validated in a lot of the research on educational learning design and in a number of other texts and theories that discuss what are the best practices in creating within these kinds of mediums and how do you go about building useful worlds, useful environments. So I'll stop there. I just wanted to lay out for you, if you're interested in having theoretical framing and some inspiration for what you could consider and how you might think through the building of worlds, those are two great sources. So that said, let's start doing our walking and talking. So we'll all stand up and we'll exit through this the same door we came through, and we are going to take a left, and we're going to go towards the West Campus. Now, hopefully you'll be able to follow me. If you can't, I'll give you landmarks, but we want to avoid that because what we want is for you to be able to navigate this world and look around you as you're doing that. So here we go. We're going to go to the left. Oh, don't cross the bridge. Sorry. We're going a direct left here, and we're going to go around the building, and there will be a bridge to cross, but just not that one. We have a second bridge, and this bridge over here on this left side leads us directly to the West Campus of the region. So here we go. And as you can see here, you still have the same aesthetic principles applied here. The bridge, the path, the garden, because this whole sim, this particular region here, has the whole Japanese garden build. Now, I have not completed the building of these regions. I still have a number of final touches, landscaping to complete, and so on. But I felt that talking to you about my design considerations and showing you what you have here is a great way to illustrate some of the kinds of things that you need to think about in world building. So here, as you can see, there's a very straightforward pathway, and it leads across the bridge. I've used the same bridges for each of the sim crossings, and what you'll see here is that if you look up at the bridge right a little bit ahead of me, on both sides, I have a sign that says West Campus so that you know where you're going. Now, if you turned around, and then on the other side says Showcase Theater with an arrow. So it shows you that if you go that way, you'll end up at the Showcase Theater sim. Boardwalks that I created were a modification of something created by another creator. There's a wonderful creator. Again, she was in Second Life with her Four Winds business. Her name is Kashari Mahana. And she actually, I was delighted to see this, has been a wonderful creator of fabulous Victorian architecture in Second Life, as well as a number of other architectural types, fantasy and so on. She created buildings that look so much like our Victorian buildings and homes in Saratoga that I was able to create the other sim without doing a whole lot of work. And I'll take you to that, our East Campus, which looks very much like our Union Avenue campus in Second Life. But that's thanks to the fact that Kashari brought in to Kitely and has available on the market her creations from Second Life. And this particular bridge was a bridge that she had available and that I purchased. But then what I did was I changed the sizing and stretched and added to the bridge, or used it to build a platform over at the roundtable discussion. So I really maximized my ability to repurpose this because I wanted to be consistent in the design, consistent in the patterns, have a unity in the organization. And therefore, you will consistently see for every sim, there's a bridge that has these signs and that help the avatar navigating this environment to know exactly where they're going and know, oh, there's the next bridge, and there I go. And Koshara worked with me on a few of these things. She didn't sell everything that she has on her sim, but some things worked well for what I wanted to do. So I asked her if she would sell them to me, and she very graciously just gave me the additional elements I needed, such as the right textures for unity of design and that sort of thing. So as you can see here, you're now entering a pathway that's a road, like a cobbled brick street. This brick road is part of a street system that is actually available on the Kitely market. It's made by a creator called Kurt Halberd, and he doesn't make it with this particular design, but he creates a whole set of interconnecting, interlocking street systems, again, very much like using Lego. I mean, it's a lot of work. You have to then bring everything in and make sure it integrates into your landscape. You have to do terraforming around it, but you can create street systems or large pathways. I have pathways here for two reasons, actually three. The first one being that it's much easier for avatars who are new, or any avatar, to know where they're going when there is a strong pathway. The second reason is that this particular region is inspired by the gorgeous Americana famous Congress Park in Saratoga Springs. It has a carousel. It has fabulous architecture and ponds filled with ducks and beautiful, timeless elements. It's the kind of park that used to exist, in latter century and before United States, and that frankly, they just don't have that many of them like this anymore in the world. So it's beautiful to see, beautiful to visit. I wanted to integrate as many elements of that park as possible into this design. Why? Because it's right next to our Union Avenue campus. And what I did here was I took our West Campus building and I plopped that down in a Congress Park-like setting. So what you have here is a pathway that is almost identical to the one that you see in Congress Park. It also connects directly to what you're going to see on the other sim. Hi, Al.
Hello.
Nice to see you. We're just doing a tour of this environment. So as you can see to the left, you're going to have elements that we won't have time to explore unless you want to spend some time exploring. But there's a walled garden that someone makes on the marketplace. It's wonderful. There's a pavilion that will soon be an information pavilion. I just have not had time to finish setting that up. And then to the far left, you're going to see a pond with koi fish in there, and a carousel. These are all types of elements that you would find in Congress Park in Saratoga, which is why they're integrated here. It also provides a very peaceful place for navigate and a beautiful component of a campus. Now, this building that you see in front of me here is essentially what I'm calling our West Campus. It looks very much like our campus on the west side of Saratoga, which we actually call 113 West Ave because it's on West Avenue, but I'm calling it West Campus here. I did not make this building, although I did create some elements for it. There is a creator called Joe Love who created something he called a Butler Mansion. I checked it out, and when I saw it, I realized that it very much had the bones, the structure of our 113 West building, although it didn't have the internal design elements of that space. So what I did was I bought the building for its bones, its structure, but it's modifiable. So then I went and on the inside and the outside, I transformed the color scheme and a number of the elements so it starts having a sense of our actual real working space, which is a combination of a conference space with classrooms and faculty offices on the ground, like the real world environment for the graduate school and for the Center for Distance Learning. So my office and Dr. O'Connor's offices are actually in that 113 West building in Saratoga. And I haven't put the offices together yet. But if you'd like to, let's go on inside. You can walk around. Just to understand it is a work in progress and that I'm in the middle of creating spaces that replicate some sense of what we have in person. And I'll be building and adding on to those. One thing I did want to add is that when I put this in place, this pathway and steps you see did not exist. I created those, again, to make it easy for people to understand where they're going and how they're getting there, and also to integrate the design of the building with the landscape into the park itself. And what you will find in this space is, again, a continuity in the design principles and a unity of design elements. You'll also see that the aesthetic look, feel, and sense of this particular region is very different from the one in the Showcase Theater, because the Showcase Theater is based on an Asian-themed kabuki theater environment that was modified. And so the whole environment there reflects that. Here, we're looking at a replication of a real-world environment and a real-world campus. So it's really more of the Northeast. It's upstate New York. We have beautiful trees, vegetation, landscaping here, and as well as a lot of water, lakes, ponds, etc. And so this environment replicates that. So as you can see, I'm starting to create an environment that is more of the real world one, so that I have some more practical spaces for people to use. And later on, when Dr. O'Connor does her STEM activity and you have hands-on group activities, feel free to come and use some of these spaces, some of these environments. So this is actually becoming a large meeting space, for example, that very much replicates one of our large meeting spaces in the real world. And then over here to the right, I started placing a little conference room because many of the downstairs spaces in our real world environment have the conference room. Oh, and I see that I have a tree that may need to be moved, but I won't worry about that now. I see a couple of things that are coming in there. So again, I've only just started building out the internal space here, and we'll continue to build this. And because the purpose of this is a combination of creating functional spaces for learning activities, group work, for meetings, etc., and to give us a sense of our community here, a replication of our real world environment placed in a space so that students and faculty who come in can have a sense of being in a place that's actually a college campus related to the one that we have. Those were the goals here. So it's a very different level of functionality from what I created over in the theater place, in which the goal there could be a theater place. Absolutely, Tully. If you want to meet here, we can. Let's get together and talk about that. I would have to set this up to be a group space, which I haven't done yet, and provide permissions so that you can do what you want to do. And then I would give you and others, sort of higher level permissions, so that if you needed to do things while I were away, you would have the permissions to do that. So Tully was asking if the alums could meet here. And I'm saying absolutely. I'm almost finished with building out this space. Once I've built it out, I'll set it up so that it can be absolutely a shared space. And if you want me to set up a corner that is the alum corner, we could talk about how we might approach that as well. I will be happy to create a space that could meet in here. So any questions about the considerations for the design of this kind of building? We have about 15 minutes to move on and talk about the two other areas and further design considerations. And most of the things you're going to see in here are really repurposed. You might recognize them. I've taken things that came for free from Linda Kelly and I've changed the coloration on them. I may have purchased a pot somewhere or used one. So I have a question there. Generally, how long does it take to build out a space like this one? Well, could you specify, Jennifer, are you talking about this building itself and building out the building, or are you talking about what it takes to create a region and build out the whole region with the park-like setting? Because they're two different things. The
Could
two
I
different
make a
levels of
statement
work.
too? Would you mind if
Sure.
I just tell anything? For students, you're looking at a beautiful building that has been created by an artist, and it takes time. What we do have are introductory courses where you start with a very K-12 concept. You work with manipulatives. You start with some very simple things, and you play. Then you start building out more elegant spaces. The course teaches you how to look at curriculum, how to look at what you're going to do within the space. It's got a design piece. So, keep in mind, this didn't happen very quickly. This has taken time. But we do have courses that structure you into this. So keep in mind, you're looking at a kind of a finished product, but we can help you get into that.
Yes, and in answer, Jennifer, I think it's a great question. I think there are a couple of things to keep in mind. First of all, I didn't build the whole building, which saved me a lot of time. I purchased a building from the marketplace that, as I said, has the bones of this. It doesn't look anything like it. Like if you see that building and you see what it looks like, it's like black and white squares, red floors, all kinds of things that go on. It had doors that opened and closed, but I felt that the doors were going to be a distraction for people, so I took them out. I did lots of different modifications. I changed all the internal colors. I changed all the colors of the frames, the window frames, the outdoor frames. I bought different wood for the floor so that I would have a beautiful wood texture that I really liked on the floors. So I did a lot of different things. And in terms of the time spent, it can be as much time to modify a building as it is to create one. Both of them require a lot of time and effort. And some of the things are very easy to do, like the color changes that I did. Oh my goodness, that's a matter of seconds. Change colors. To throw a texture on the floor and change the floor texture, that's a matter of seconds. But some other things, like making sure every frame is the right color, like it's that particular shade of black, finding the color that I wanted to have on the walls that matches the walls at 113 West. Because if you go to 113 West, you'll go, wow, it's the same colors. That took some time. So the design considerations themselves, like figuring out what you want, getting your prototype ready, that can take hours, days, weeks. But once you have that, then the actual applying of that across the board, okay, now every floor is going to have this texture. It took me, 3 days or 2 weeks of looking to find what I wanted. But then once I have it and I know what I'm doing, then it took me all of 5 minutes to put everything down. So sometimes the work that you're doing, requires so much more time at the conceptual level. And again, those of you who've done advanced learning design with me know that. You spend a lot of time on your concept development and on your proposal development and thinking things through and the considerations I make you have. But once you're done with that, the actual getting in there and doing the work is sometimes less time than the effort and time it takes to think it through ahead of time. So I did this in phases in answer to your question. The first phase was researching the right building. The second phase was, once I had the building, thinking of the design considerations I would have. Third phase was making sure I went through my own building physically and thinking through the elements I wanted to make sure would be present here, taking pictures, comparing colors, that kind of thing. And then the fourth phase was actually implementing that. I created this separately somewhere else in a different space. So that I could spend the time freely to create it without having to mess with my region here. And then I brought it and put it into the region. And then from there, I'd say I probably spent a couple of half days finalizing what you have here. So putting together something like this is time consuming. On the other hand, it was time well spent. Now that I have this set up, I'll have a few additional design elements to add, a few different functional elements to add, but then it'll be here for as long as we want it. And as Telly asked, she said, can the alums use it? Yes, it'll be available for all kinds of resources, for all sorts of uses. So it was time well spent. But do be prepared. If you're going to do some designing and playing around in the virtual world of any kind, there is quite a bit of time involved. And what I did to make sure all of these sims were well put together is that I spent time over summers, a little bit of my scholarly time, creating different aspects. So I created the Showcase Theater at one point, the Round Table at one point, the Union Avenue sim at another point, and then finalized the sim separately. So it was not done in one go. Everything was done in stages. All right, so any further questions before we move on? We have just a few minutes to walk through the rest of the Sims.
Nicola, is this one island or do you have 4 islands put together?
Great question. This is 4 islands, 4 regions put together. So 4 Sims. So each bridge well, I wouldn't say each bridge. The big brick Victorian bridges each connect from one Sim to the next, so they're 4 Sims. You would not have the space on one Sim to create what I've created here. This is definitely an interconnecting 4 regions. The cost of this is $20 a month for 4 regions, which frankly is an absolute bargain. In Second Life, there was a setup cost of about $1,000, and then regions cost $300 individually or $200 if you were per region if you were an educational institution. So the cost in Second Life to have one Sim was $200 per month, and the cost to maintain it for 4 Sims would have been $800 a month. If you compare that to $20 a month for 4 Sims, it's a real bargain, and there's no setup cost. The other aspect of it are 2 things I think we should point out now. One is that if you want to have 16 Sims, it's only an extra, $10 or so. It's really, or maybe 20. It's not expensive. So I can add on to these if I want to, which I'm considering doing at this point, once I've finished with my four main regions here. The other thing to consider is that there's a wonderful feature. If you have to be away, I had to be away for a year on sabbatical. I didn't want to pay $20 a month for my Sims because I wasn't going to be using them at that time. Well, they have an archival feature. It costs pennies per day to put it on hold as an archive that still exists but that you don't use. And so for just a few dollars in the whole year, I was able to maintain all of my Sims and not lose any of them or the information on them. So there are a lot of advantages to being in this environment, and there are different ways of managing how you use and when you use your regions. Yes, you can back them up as OARs, but be forewarned. If you back up as an OAR and you've purchased items from the marketplace and those things are not export enabled, they will not be backed up with your OAR. So then when you reset your Sim, you'd have to pull back out of your inventory and reestablish the things that weren't exported, which can be a time-consuming effort. So just be sure that if you're going to be exporting and relying only on export for saving, that these are things that you have had, they're either OpenSim resources you created or used, and that you have full export capability. Even some things that are open resources and free to copy and mod here in Kitely may not necessarily be things that will be exported. Oh, and Dr. O'Connor is telling you this now, so sorry, I won't repeat what you'll already be learning if you're taking the courses. But yes, there are lots of details of what you need to know to be successful. So we're just going over the basic, like, a broad brushstroke of things to consider. But definitely, there's so many technical things and creative as well as learning components that you'll need to have. So we only have a few minutes left. Let's do a quick walkthrough of the next 2. So we're going to do this fast. I just want you to see what we have available. So walking down here, we're going to walk and take the right turn at the end of the road, and we're crossing over to our Union Avenue, so Sim that I'm calling the East, just because it is the side of Saratoga in real life where it is held. Just like this one is on the West Campus because it's the west side of Saratoga Sims, because we have 2 campuses in Saratoga. Now here I've started replicating a lot of what you would actually see in the Congress Park in Saratoga. You have fountains and waterways, you have lanterns, you have benches, and I'll be adding more of the landscaping as soon as I have more time. And now we have one of these bridges and the signs. If you look, you see the East Campus signs are present. And we're just going to walk through the East Campus. Since we don't have much more time, I'm just going to walk through it so that you can be doing with. But Kohara created these. Oh, this seed still needs to be landscaped properly, so you to get over here. I still need to finish the proper integration of that, building the right level of bump from that spot. Sorry, this sim is very incomplete. I still have a number of things that need to be done to integrate the terraforming, to integrate the landscaping. The wall that you see there, the big one is coming down. It's too high, but that's how that building came. But these buildings very much replicate what the buildings of our administrative campus look like in Second Life. The President's Building, Academic Affairs, the Office for Information Technology, the Alumni House. All of these buildings look very similar to those. So I'm in the process of creating an environment that very much replicates what you'll see on Union Avenue. Now at the bottom there, you'll see a painted stick Victorian, and in real life, Union Avenue goes on and on and on, and it leads to the fabulous, famous Saratoga Springs racetrack, the race course, which is amazing. You won't see that here because the sim stops. And what you would see normally, if you kept going on this road to the left, you'd see a painted Victorian that looks just like this one. So what I did is I bought the painted Victorian, the stick Victorian, and I put it right here so it is part of the sim. And it has a sense of what you would see on Union Avenue, but it doesn't actually have the real life placement, because in real life, it would continue. The road would continue, and you would reach, after these buildings a little bit further away, you would reach the racetrack, the race course, which is also like Congress Park, has very much an old Americana feel to it, and is very much something to experience, a very unique experience in Saratoga. So we're just walking around. I just want you to have a sense that this is the Union Avenue campus in progress. And my goal with this one functionality, also the aesthetic sense and the sense of building a space to be here. Now again, I have not the terraforming here. I apologize for that. So I still need here to, maybe I'll just do a very quick job of pulling this up at least enough so that you can reach it, because it's not going to be wide enough, high enough for you to, there we go. I'll just put that there for now, and I'll fix it later. At least here you'll be able to walk up and over onto the bridge. Otherwise, you wouldn't be able to go there up that steps. Everyone to come on over. We're almost out of time, so I'm just gonna take a very quick walk over here. Some of you who've taken classes with me are very familiar with this space that we're going to. It's our roundtable discussion space for the courses. We have very active and engaged roundtable discussions. I'm always impressed with the near 100% attendance of those. Our students love them. They're really a great way for engaging. And as you see, the Victorian Bridge here is very long and has become a huge platform. I took our original little bridge and I modified it to create this very long boardwalk, and to create a platform upon which the Roundtable House sits. And this was originally the Lakeside House by Linda Kelly, and then I transformed it to become what you see today. And as you can see, this again is a response to the first questions I always ask myself or a student when creating a design space. Simply, what is the purpose of this space? How are their needs? So what we've done here is that we have a beautiful space that is solely devoted to the idea of having roundtable discussions, and people just have to come, click on a chair, sit down, and then voila, our conversation can begin. It's a very easy entryway into the virtual worlds. Most people in the classes have had lots of experience in virtual worlds thanks to Dr. O'Connor's wonderful work. But sometimes you're going to use from, let's say, another master's program. What I have found is that even the newbies are able to very successfully enter this space, sit down, and participate in our conversation. So having said that, I believe my time is up. I hope that you have found this a useful introduction to world building. And if we have time, I'm open to a couple of questions now, but I do think that we're almost out of time.
I'd like to just jump in to remind people at 1 o'clock we reconvene. You will possibly get your avatar signed off if you are inactive for too long. If that's the case, come back. We're going to have another one of Nicola's reviews of some of the art programs. And then at 1:30, we're going to go into an activity related to STEM, but it's open to everyone. And to keep in mind, you're looking at a very lovely advanced design island. We start in our courses, we bring you starting from the basics, initially playing with the materials, and you can download islands today for free and modify them. So for many teachers, they really start at that level and then they advance, they repurpose things. So keep in mind, this is where I hope you all ultimately get, but we do bring you in through steps. So anyway, just enough logistically, if the conversation goes on, I will have to leave. But Nicola, where would you like people to join you at 1? Should they come to this space? Where should we assemble?
I think this might be the best space to talk about the arts and creative side. And, oh, thank you so much, Al. Thank you so much, everyone. You know, it's a work in progress, as I mentioned. I still have a number of functionalities and design touches to make, but it's certainly well on its way to becoming the kind of campus that will be very functional for us. I think we should meet here because this is a great space. I'll add some more chairs so that we have plenty of chairs for everyone for the first 10 minutes of introductory material, and then we'll just go do a hands-on activity. So this would be a good space for that, I believe. And for the hands-on, I'll probably take us up to a space that won't mess with any of the things that already exist. So in other words, I'll put up a platform somewhere where we can go and do something hands-on without interfering with the design if I enable creation on that space. So if you want, I can give you a landmark. So here we go. I'm should be getting these from me. I'm providing you with a landmark to the roundtable discussion space. All you have
So
to
that
do
means when you come back, you will automatically go to that space if you look at the landmark. If not, I suggest look at your world map now to see these folks haven't navigated too much yet. So if they can't find that through the landmark, just come into the space. You should see some other green dots here at the same time. Sorry.
Yes.
I think too, you can leave your avatar here. They stay active. They used to go to sleep, but if you do get signed off by the server, then just come back in. So thank you all, and we'll see you back at 1.
to consider? Eileen, is there anything else we need to consider, or shall we take a break and reconvene back here at 1 o'clock?
No, I think we're going fine. And just give me at 1:30, if you could, wherever you're working, I'll break them into some groups and give them that final activity. I'm not sure where Mark wants us to meet. So I better get a hold of him, just be sure. Anyway, my idea with the group activity is that they then come back together at the end and do a debriefing. So I think it'll depend on where you have your sandbox. Then we'll just designate things. But maybe the debriefing you think should be back in this room?
We could do it here if you like, or we could do it at your place, whatever you prefer.
Okay. Yeah, I have a round table space there too. Okay. And they do know how to get back there. So we'll